what we're going to do is we're going to mix the Titan IPA from Great Divide Brewing with Founders Doom.
That's dangerous, Cole. We've
Imperial
never
IPA.
done this before.
We've never done this on a
This
podcast
is outrageous.
before. It's very outrageous.
You're mixing these together. This is like the fuel and the oxidizer here. This is serious business. This is takeoff after
Yeah,
this.
when these two liquids join together. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Le Grand Bouffe.
The big feast.
With myself, Cole Smithy, and my co-host, Mike Lacey. As always, we are here to copiously consume international politics and culture through the prism of a single film and a different craft beer. And this week, we are honored to have the one and only Anthony Matt as our co-host.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Anthony, we want to hear about all of your exciting stuff because you were in New York with Prime Focus a year ago and you've been in LA for the past year. So what's going on with your post-production work and all of your other film projects?
So I'm still with Prime Focus, and, my tenure there, I've worked on lots of various film projects, commercials, and feature films, independent feature films, and particularly documentaries. And when I was in New York, I got to work with all the great legends of documentary film like Les Blank and Albert Maysles and D.A. Pennebaker and Barbara Koppel. And then through those relationships, I got to meet all their children who are kind of inheriting their archives. So I've been working with a number of them to kind of strategize on how to maintain these films, because generally filmmakers want to make new movies. They don't want to deal with their old films. They want to kind of keep moving forward and let someone else deal with that. And that generally falls on the shoulders of their offspring to kind of manage, this body of work. And particularly with like Harold Blank, I've been working with Harold Blank, Les Blank's son. And we're working on a great film right now called Chulas Fronteras. And it's translates to Beautiful Borders, and it's about Mexican border music, and it was shot around 1975, and it's just this incredible film that's just like aged with time. At the time, I don't think anyone was really, not that they weren't blown away and won lots of awards, but looking at it today, it's just amazing. It's like this almost halcyon kind of world where things were so much better between the United States and Mexico, and there was this thriving border culture. But they're speaking to all today's problems from 1975, talking about how Mexicans have been scapegoated for hundreds of years for various political reasons, for American politicians to further their careers. And I'm really excited about it. We're doing a 4K restoration of it and trying to, get it presentable to probably, premiere at a major film festival.
I was just watching a video about Criterion and how long it takes to do a 4K restoration as opposed to a 2K, and I didn't realize that it's 4 times longer. It takes 4 times longer to do a 4K than a 2K.
Yeah, it's 4 times as much data and requires 4 times as much computing power and storage and so it makes everything much more complicated. But when you go through all this work, you want to kind of do it once and then kind of try to future-proof it, even though you never really quite do that. So you want to kind of
future-proofing. There's a applies to their movie today.
Yeah, you don't want to handle the assets of the film too much because you damage them and risk damaging them every time you touch them. So, and a lot of these films are falling apart and they're shot on like older film stocks that don't last that long. So you need to, you kind of want to make the most of it because it might be the best element that you're going to, reproduce for future generations to see. And, talking about Criterion, like there's a film, Seven Samurai, they released, and I believe they sold like 1 million DVDs of Seven Samurai, and that's a film from 1956 that generated $27 million, 70 years after it was made. And, when you look at these movies, you want to preserve them because they have a long life, and you want to kind of extend that life into the future as far as possible and make them, you talk about like a film 400 years from now. These are the kind of things that I'm kind of talking about with filmmakers right now. And it's fun. It's fun working on like classic films, and you don't have the same pressure as making a new movie for a festival where they're just kind of like, we got to get this done by September or whatever, and just we'll deal with that later. And there's this kind of pressure to kind of just, it makes the experience of working on a film a little more stressful. And when you work with a classic film, you can kind of take your time and really kind of go back and fix things that probably were never addressed initially. So
Cool.
In working with archiving and kind of dealing with the celluloid that is deteriorating, does it make you think about these like digital mediums that we have, whether it's a Blu-ray disc, a hard drive somewhere that needs to keep spinning to stay active, and then that damages it, and then if you don't spin it, that damages it? Like, what is a future-proof medium to preserve art on?
I spoke to an engineer, video engineer. He actually invented instant replay, and I had this fortunate opportunity to kind of work with all these old video engineers that like invented video at this company I used to work at when I was in college. And I was talking to this guy, and he was a member of this group, AMIA, and I'm a member of AMIA. It's the Film Archivists Association. And they basically all the nation's film librarians and media librarians all join. And someone asked him that exact same question. He said the best recording medium was Mayan temples because they're made out of lots of stone and they can weather the elements. And they're the only things that actually really do survive. Paper and film and magnetic media. Magnetic media is essentially, rust glued to a piece of plastic. It's very fragile. And recording, like digital media, is just the most effervescent recording media ever, like flash drives. And the main thing that people are doing right now is making LTO tapes, which are like these computer kind of data tapes that are almost harken back to the original computer circular tapes you see in like 70s films of computers. It's kind of like the same technology, but it's a digital kind of equivalent that you can store equivalent about 6 terabytes on one tape right now. And then every couple of years they double the capacity. But even those have you have to move them every 5 years to be really safe. They say they last for 30 years, but the technology itself to play back the tape obsolesces faster than the tape. So, finding that version of the Mac software that you did that picture on in your computer in 2004
right,
is a real challenge. So it's kind of like the real problem they're facing right now is just not how they're going to save, but what they're going to save, because everything's like these big studio films generate petabytes of data, of dailies and all stuff, and you just can't maintain all that and keep it. It's just too expensive. And it's like this Sisyphus-like exercise, and just you go to another format, and then you got to go to another format, and it just never ends, and it just gets more and more, and you have more copies, and which copy's the best. And it's a real problem that a lot of people are really looking at seriously. And it's got some really good. There's really good people dedicated to this. I'm partially dedicated to as well. It's just something I've been involved with since I was in college. Just kind of fell into it. But the more you think about it, it's kind of like who we are, like the film archiving and film mastering, and library sciences in general. You kind of can't have a culture unless you maintain everything. Like I went to this AMIA meeting, and they had Ian McKay from Fugazi and Minor Threat was giving this presentation, and he kind of was talking to the whole group, and he's like, you people are the coolest people in the world, because without you doing your work, we wouldn't know where we came from.
Yeah.
And the music wouldn't survive, and we would just be repeating ourselves. And thanks to your efforts, we're not going to repeat ourselves, and we're going to have an archive of what's happened before us, and that'll evolve the culture. And I thought that was a really, really good kind of way of, summarizing the work that librarians do.
Mm-hmm.
That is a cool shout out to get from Fugazi.
Yeah.
That is like high praise. I really think that did tee us up like kind of perfectly for this movie about aging technology and not just things, not really just things being forgotten, but when your technology can lead to mass destruction when it's falling apart. Who wants to cue us? Do you want to talk about what movie we did?
Well, since Anthony chose the film, let's I'll just cue it up a little bit and say that I found Anthony called me on Friday, said he was in town, and went down to the bar to meet he and his wife and their friends, and I just wanted to get him on the podcast because I knew that he's flying back to LA tomorrow, and so he brought up we were just talking about what movies he'd seen that stuck with him recently, and he brought up Command and Control. So tell us what you think, Anthony.
I've always been drawn to like big ideas, and like trying to reduce problems to like the like what's a problem that's worthy of everyone's attention. What max if we address this issue, will it have a maximum impact over all our lives and improve humanity. I started reading lots of philosophy in college and really got into like George Bernard Shaw and really got into Aldous Huxley and they would tackle these like big ideas. And I think this film Command and Control is in that kind of vein. It's talking about an issue that is uncomfortable, that everyone should take more notice of, and it kind of tackles a big problem looming. It's like as big as pollution or carbon dioxide being emitted and extinction. It kind of, it's an umbrella issue that kind of is bundled in with all these kind of problems that we all face. And I was talking to Cole, my wife's expecting, or we're expecting a baby, and you start thinking about the future and where we're going and what kind of world we're going to live in. And I think this film really addresses those kind of big issues and talks about something that was much more in the consciousness, I think, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and has just completely died out. Like, people just don't think about atomic weapons and how dangerous they are. And the film is based on a book, and the author is made this kind of like one of his core issues he's been writing about and promoting for years. And
is it Eric Schlosser? Is that
yeah. Eric's in the film, and actually worked on another film he did called The Bomb. And The Bomb is kind of like a avant-garde kind of cinema experience similar to Command and Control, but based on music and kind of trying to impress upon people the destructive power of atomic weapons, because it's hard to visualize. So it's like kind of multi-sensory visualization of destruction.
Richard Linklater adapted one of his books too, about the meat industry. They worked on that together.
You're talking about Food Inc.?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Food Inc. I think that's...
Was Linklater involved in that?
No, is that the film?
That's the director, I believe.
Linklater directed it?
No. The same director of Command and Control did Food Inc.
Did Food Inc.
Yeah.
I thought Linklater and Schlosser did something.
They might have.
Maybe I'm confused about the.
He's trying to get
thing.
as many people involved in these kind of food production's a similar big topic. I went vegan 2 years ago, and it's like I think nuclear weapons are kind of in that kind of realm, and I thought I look at a lot of documentary films, and this was shortlisted for an Academy Award, and I think it should have been nominated. I think O.J. Made in America is an excellent movie.
Yeah.
But this certainly deserved more attention. And it's a film, it's an uncomfortable film. It'll keep you up at night. Like I was talking to a coworker of mine. She's like, oh, I read the book. I saw the movie. My daughter watched part of it and she couldn't go to sleep. And she's like, a 12-year-old girl. And it is a really, scary topic, and you're talking about, weapons that we built in the 60s that are capable of blowing away 3
And
states at once.
how many thousands of them? I don't remember. from-
35,000, I think they said.
Well,
At one point in the
yeah, there was
late 60s.
35,000 of them when they initially thought 250 would be enough to destroy Russia.
Before we get too many tweets, I just wanted to say the movie you were thinking about,
Yeah.
same author, Fast Food Nation,
Fast Food
Eric
Nation.
Schlosser,
Yeah.
and Richard Linklater did like a live action narrative version of it. But yeah, so definitely
That's right. They
Schlosser.
were-
I've read that book. It's an excellent book, and Schlosser's
I interviewed both of them in Cannes the year that movie came out, and they were both really great to talk to.
But yeah, to loop back, you're saying at one point they did the math and we needed 250 atomic weapons because they're very powerful. And then by the mid-late 60s, we had 35,000.
Yeah.
One of the scenes that really struck me was the one where they're talking about doing the test, and they thought before they did the test that it might end humanity.
It might set the
Atmosphere.
The
Atmosphere
entire
on fire.
Earth's atmosphere on fire.
Yeah.
And then they did it anyway.
Yeah.
The fuck?
I mean, you get that like Oppenheimer quote, and like you just really imagine that messing with things like this do put you in some sort of like headspace where you're thinking of yourself as like Shiva or something. The quote of like I am become death destroyer of worlds is, yeah, how could you not get in some weird megalomaniac like headspace to create the most powerful like form of destruction like in the world, and then to behind this movement.
There's a shot in the film, some stock footage of this guy standing on the edge of this tractor with a missile with I think it's like Little Boy, or like one of the early tests they did. It wasn't Little Boy, but I can't remember the name of the 2 devices, the first Trinity devices. And he's standing though, riding this tractor, precariously on the corner with his arms kind of akimbo, like just this macho kind of tough guy, construction guy moving this missile. This just so cavalier. And you kind of have to have that mindset to kind of really go forward with these missiles. And it's something that, needs to be spoken to and politically addressed, I think. Like the people in power with these missiles and our current presidency, I think one of the second things he tweeted was we need better, more powerful modern nuclear weapons because the world just isn't ready yet. And it's just so sad, but that's the state of things. So we just need to build more sophisticated, powerful missiles and powerful warheads, smaller warheads. All these things do not make us safer. And that's kind of what this film speaks to. And I think it speaks to it in a very creative way. And I've worked on a lot of documentaries, and a lot of documentary films are made by first-time filmmakers, and they kind of don't really have the ability to kind of put a story together in a very sophisticated kind of artistic way. And I think this film has this really great production value to it in recreating these scenes.
It's incredible. It's phenomenal.
It just draws you in such a great way.
How did they get all this footage? They've got this incredible footage inside this. I mean, what do you call it? It's a bomb shelter.
Well,
or it's the where you the missile base where you're actually launching it. Yeah.
So there's all these shots of a silo from the 1980s that are it's all CGI. Mm-hmm. So those are all really photoreal CGI shots that they use for the recreation.
It's incredible.
And it's just seamless.
It is seamless.
You feel like you're really there, and you can modern CGI, if you have enough money, you can do anything. You can imagine anything, and they kind of apply this in a very subtle way, though. And it's not like Guardians of the Galaxy here, but it really draws you in to, and it's, there's these kind of slow operatic shots of the missile, just kind of giving you a sense of how big it is, and
Is it a Titan missile?
It's Titan II.
All right, so that brings us, just for a brief little segue here, we're going to talk about the beer, because I really took it upon myself to be just as reckless with my beer choices that I think are appropriate for this movie. And so what we're going to do is we're going to mix the Titan IPA from Great Divide Brewing with Founders Doom.
That's dangerous, Cole. We've
Imperial
never
IPA.
done this before.
We've never done this on a
This
podcast
is outrageous.
before. It's very
You're
outrageous.
mixing these together. This is like the fuel and the oxidizer here. This is serious business. This is takeoff after
Yeah,
this.
when these two liquids join together,
What I always heard is that our rockets were always twice as tall as the Russians, whether it was a space mission or our intercontinental missiles, because we would do this thing where we mix the fuel and the oxidizer. It requires twice as much space, and it's marginally safer. They had a lot more cosmonauts blow up on the launch pad than we did, but that's exactly. I mean, we're talking about the beer right now, but
No, I think it's a great.
that
great
seems to be what
analog here.
kind of went wrong with.
Something could really go wrong mixing these two beers, and we're going to find out.
all right. So
gonna
here we go.
find out,
Cheers,
all right.
cheers, everybody. We're gonna see
So this is an IPA and what? Am I in a?
and an Imperial IPA.
Oh, this is crazy.
So we're putting the Doom on top of the Titan, which I think the Titans are doomed. The one that in this movie certainly was.
okay, that's kind of great.
It works. It's a good mix.
It is. It's yummy.
Yeah, the Imperial definitely like cuts the hop a bit, and then adds like a sort of like rich like kind of molassesy note in there. I think. Although I can't tell them apart. I don't know.
No,
I'm just
but
guessing here.
Yeah, it's yummy. It's definitely there's some alcohol in there, which I think you need to watch this movie. It's a harrowing film. What year did the accident occur?
1982. One thing that you're mentioning earlier about the Oppenheimer and the mind state and the kind of type of person it creates. I think this film, everyone involved in this film is a different person. It's like, the way astronauts change by seeing the moon. It's almost like a spiritual kind of experience, and I think they've gone through a very transformative experience of suffering and anxiety that normal people have never experienced. No one, like before this incident, these guys are already under a tremendous amount of stress with the responsibility of basically murdering 10 million people on command, and being trained to do that without thinking. And the protocols that they're under and the scrutiny that they're under is tremendous. And they're being overworked. That's kind of apparent in the film. Like all the technicians are working 15-hour days, going from missile to missile. And
they're all 22, 24,
yeah.
19.
yeah,
like,
the senior guys are like 24.
just think about that. That's in charge there. And I was wondering if is that because a senior officer who's 24 is not going to ask those questions. Like, I think there are people in that chain of command. My grandfather worked in the Defense Intelligence Agency and was actually in charge regionally for the bombers that were flying with nuclear bombs for years. And I like, though you're supposed to flip the switch if the president tells you, the inside scoop I had is that there are people who will like question those orders, but they are not the people who are stationed at the missile base. Like, those people are the kind of people that just push that button because they're 24-year-old and they probably haven't read Kant, and they're not going to like think too deeply about like the categorical imperative of blowing up these 10 million people. They're going to do what they're told. But that also means that they're not the most trained senior calm under fire people when things go wrong.
Yeah, there was a Radio Lab podcast recently about a guy who decided to question the protocols because he was involved in this kind of lower level protocol of, what was the override for bad decision making on the president's level, because there's all these protocols going all the way down to the guy flipping the switch, but there's no protocol for the top
Right.
decision maker. What if that person's mad? There's no stopping them. So he kind of asked this question, and it bounced around and got up the chain of command, and they kind of ruined his career.
Wow.
For just asking that question. And he's like, I have a real problem with this. This doesn't sit well with me because I know, what my decision making skills, and I know where I sit in this level of command, but I don't really have faith in the top of the command. And the questions kind of arose with Richard Nixon, but
I was going to bring up Nixon. I asked my grandfather if the current president is one of the more alarming people that he's seen in power, and he immediately said, like, no, Richard Nixon. And in the missile community in the 60s and 70s, there was an understanding that if you're a junior officer and your phone rings, Richard Nixon might have gotten your number and is going to call you and ask you to do some fucked up stuff. And you're under, like, they couldn't have official orders about it, but the understanding across all ranks was like, you hang up that phone, you call your superior. Like, there's a chain of command that you have to follow and he has to follow. And you don't just do something because Tricky Dick like called you. And like, that blew my mind.
yeah.
But that's, the good and bad part of chain of command is it's supposed to go both ways. So there are ideally supposed to be these checks and balances that funnel up and down. But, there's still so much room for mistakes and just unforeseeable nightmares like this one.
Yeah, and the we were talking earlier about technology and changing technology, and I was kind of quaint that they had, like, in the film they show this, they have these security codes they get, and they have to burn them with a match and throw them into a bucket.
Yeah, was this Get Smart? Like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
But that actually might be a superior method than using some modern iPhone app or something to log in.
Two-factor authentication
Yeah, I mean,
thing.
the analog nature of the missile might actually be a blessing in some respects. Compared to, like, a digital system that could be, broken down through software or hacked into.
Do you hear that it's like the MTA runs on floppy disks, or like Missile Command, I think, runs on floppy disks, and that's what they say is, like, these things are so incompatible with the internet that it's like the best place you could get it. It's like Battlestar Galactica, basically. Like, get it off the network.
The subway car that was held together with a zip tie. You saw that last week.
Is this the A train that crashed?
No, there was some writer noticed this gigantic zip tie. I kid you not, a zip tie that you could see from the platform that was holding this gear onto the wheel. And yeah, the MTA, the MTA says, we use that. That's just a fail-safe.
What did our governor just call our transportation? A national emergency, right? Yeah, I'll agree with that. We are terrible at a country in maintaining infrastructure, to a horrifying degree. And, let's one thing that we've skipped in talking about this movie is, like, what actually happened in this case. But it is a result of people neglecting infrastructure, because by 1980, these missiles were 25, 30 years old.
Yeah.
And all that really happened, this entire crisis that we're talking about, which led to this missile exploding, and potentially it could have caused the nuclear warhead to go off, came from someone dropping a socket that bounced, bumped into the side of the rocket, put a hole in one of its fuel chambers, and then filled the entire silo with fuel. And if you didn't have out-of-date socket wrenches, if you didn't have people neglecting these, like, incredibly powerful things that could blow up 75 miles and spread atomic radiation to other states, maybe you could prevent these things. But there's great, like, Freakonomics episodes recently about, like, why no one gives a shit about maintenance. It's like, we want the biggest rockets, we want the new rockets. What about the ones we have now, and how we're liable to hurt ourselves way more than any adversary? The Russians at that time, or what ISIS is.
That's an interesting point, and it plays into this idea of planned obsolescence. And I think it's interesting, the crossover between military and corporate ideology that you see. And I think that's part of what you're talking about is this planned obsolescence that has been going on for a very long time in corporate ideology, and it's crossed over into military ideology.
Just nukes were an industry, and they talk about the history of the people who invented it. Quickly turned it into a just sort of Ford style line of production, and they're making money off this. And you stop making money if you make a missile that lasts for all time. So, and how do you sell? You got to sell more and more to keep making profit. So you make sure that the next one is better than that. If there's a problem with the old one, you're not making it future proof doesn't exist. You can make it as well as you could, and still there's going to be advents in technology that are unforeseeable. But also there's, I think, most likely like a planned flaw in these things, that they're not perfect. You need to buy the next one.
I was just shocked at how in the press conference, and the guy comes out with the socket wrench, and the thing, it's like 5 feet long, and the socket is the size of your head.
Yeah, it was
it's
8 pounds.
Like an 8-pound socket head.
Which, according to that little ugly kid in Jerry Maguire, is actually the weight of the human head. Interesting fact.
Yeah. But that, like missiles are really fragile systems. I mean, look at SpaceX now, and they're trying to finally make one that's reusable, and,
Yeah, they had it successfully took off and landed.
But it also blew up a bunch.
It
blew up 10 times,
before they got there.
And they're, it's there's lots of room for improvement with rockets, and it's just any system that is made by people is not going to be entirely safe. I think the point of the film is that these scenarios are so complicated, and the protocols, you can have all the protocols you want, and there's some unforeseen thing because no one can imagine every single scenario that can go wrong. And just the act of just having missiles is inherently dangerous. It puts us all at risk. They're everywhere. They're hidden upstate. They're in New York. They're in California. They're in Texas. They're in all these different areas.
You could buy a house and not know that this thing was in your backyard.
Yeah, and it's the act of having them puts everyone at risk, and we all need to do more as a species, not as a country, because this transcends nationalism.
Right.
We have to kind of create a different way of living and thinking about the world where we don't have these things anymore, because they're incredibly dangerous and they're going to kill us all someday. And they all mention in the film, it's not a question of if, it's when one of these is going to catastrophically fail. And making more of them does not, increase our odds of survival. And you think about one missile going off or one warhead going off in a city, and the political ramifications of that, and the destruction of freedom, and the fear that it would create in the post-nuke accident world. And it's a scary place. There's just nothing positive about them. And, they're born of this just crazy time where we're, gunning with this other nation, and we still are. That's the one thing that's kind of lost, I think, on people, is that I think, Vladimir Putin is definitely still playing that game. He still wants to win that game. He didn't give up playing it. And he's, God knows what kind of problems they've had in Russia with their weapons, because, they just don't tell anybody. There's lots of, Vice News has been doing lots of Russian reporting lately. It's been pretty interesting. And, they have this strategic desire for global warming, to essentially warm up more land and get palm trees in Russia, because, global warming for Russia is a good thing.
That's like the darkest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life.
And a bad thing for everyone else.
Well, it's going to open up all sorts of northern shipping routes, and
and oil. You can mine more or drill for more oil under the ice, and
Siberia becomes the Florida of Russia.
Yeah, the permafrost makes lots of nice melts and creates lots of river valleys.
It's nice when in real life you get to see like the movie villains that you just kind of like, oh, no one's really has that dark of an agenda. Like, that's over the top. And it's just good to validate this sort of Goldfinger level, like, total cynicism and diabolicalness. It just makes movies more fun. To have such real life villains.
No, and this documentary is kind of like a modern Strangelove film.
It really is.
It's like a serious Strangelove.
It
movie.
really is.
Talking about what these B-52 bombers exploding and 2 megaton warhead falling in South Carolina, some farm field, and the only thing preventing it from going off was like a light switch that was switched the wrong way, or right way.
So we should point out that it's in Arkansas.
Yeah,
where this particular accident.
Now, who was governor in Arkansas in
82?
82.
Bill Clinton.
It was Bill Clinton.
So it's a nice little window into seeing future president show up on the news. Given the sort of like, let's not worry too much. Everyone who needs to know what's going on is in the know and everything's fine. Just nice little disinfo from future pres there.
Well, there's a lot of Democratic spinning going on there with the Democratic senator and governor hiding the fact that, they almost lost their state, just not to cause a panic and to kind of keep this kind of mass hallucination of safety going on.
When you say lose their state, you mean explode it.
Yeah.
Right?
Wipe it off the map.
Yeah, this is
I like it when the soldiers are marching in a line as if they were looking for a missing person in the woods, but really they're looking for the warhead. Because they
looking for like a body.
After they are looking for like a dead body. It's just like they're looking for a dead body.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of missing warheads in the world, and like they wind up getting like sold. There's rumors of them getting sold. I bet like Vice is going to this, but I know like there's a Japanese death cult in the early 90s called Shinrikyo that their ambition was to buy one of these warheads that either falls off a missile or like a plane crashes, and they're just around. They're in the world, and like there are like teams that go out and recover them. But like sort of what turned out to be a myth that was dispelled for me is I was always told like, look, if you blow up a nuclear bomb, like if you shoot a missile at a nuclear bomb, the nuke won't go off because the nuke is triggered by like...
It's a different mechanism.
It's a different mechanism. Except as they point out in this is that mechanism is fired by circuits
and electronics
that go off in electronics. You get those really hot.
And this particular one was a little light switch.
This was the one that fell out of the plane.
Yeah.
Out of the B-52, but even they were worried about this missile is like, well, yes, it's a different mechanism that sets off the nuclear bomb because it's not like a regular sort of combustible bomb. If you bring fire near it, it goes off. A nuclear weapon is triggering, I don't know, fucking some fusion shit. Like I don't remember my Einstein or anything, but the thing is that is triggered by an electronic switch that if you melt, you could have one piece of solder hit the wrong connection and suddenly
kaboom.
It's armed, kaboom, right? And so that just raises the stakes so much more for me that if, a plane crashes into the wrong missile base and then...
There is a group that's dedicated to drawing down all of the nukes in the world, and there's a map, there's a video that shows the nuclear proliferation since the 50s. I think you guys have seen it.
Yeah, it's great.
It's really great, but it's also scary as hell because you just see the acceleration. It seems like every year there's just more and more creation of these weapons, these bombs. But there is a group that's trying to bring that number down and to get rid of these things. And then that brings us to the question of how do you get rid of it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the real issue is the technology is going to be democratized. As we progress this unbelievable achievement of American might and wealth in 1944, the Manhattan Project will soon be available to some kid,
some wiki hell.
And you'll be able to download the files and get the, manufacture the tools necessary to build an atomic weapon. So, that was something President Obama said kept him up at night, was the thought of a small device going off in a major American city, and that's a possibility. And like so many things that are uncomfortable, people just don't want to think about it, so they don't, and they just keep marching ahead. And these are kind of issues, I think, there's this concept in one of George Bernard Shaw's plays of the masters of reality and the slaves of reality. And he says the angelic temperament is to be a master of reality and to kind of know the real world issues and kind of deal with them and deal with these uncomfortable things and work through them. And the kind of demonic mentality is just to ignore them and have fun and live it up. And I think we've all been living it up collectively far too much. And this film is kind of like this kind of reality check where we just got to kind of do more work and kind of work towards some kind of genuine goals to kind of solve these problems, because they're not going to go away by ignoring them. And I just don't know. I just thought the film kind of ticked so many different boxes for me, and that's why I wanted to kind of talk more about it, and just kind of because it kind of flew under the radar. I didn't really get a lot of. I mean, it got some good press, but it wasn't like.
I saw it on YouTube. It's streaming on Netflix, Command and Control, and yeah, as a documentary, I just found it to be so engrossing because they really take you inside this bomb. I mean, you really feel like you're down in there, and you have to go through all these really thick walls, and what it would be like to be one of these 24, 22-year-old kids responsible for taking care of this thing.
It's really terrific cinematography, and it's kind of period footage, or like this, like seeming like it. I don't know if they shot it on 16 or 35, or if it was all post. Do you know any like history of what the actual?
And they must have had some actual footage, like when they're at the site.
Yeah, well, they had excellent stock footage. They did a lot of research and dug up some stunning stock footage, even that like 80s like video 3/4 inch tape of all the guys in the mess hall, getting their orders, and this like real, classic 80s video that they had.
And the aftermath of the explosion, the bomb site area.
Yeah, and they had some aerial footage thanks to those reporters that are in the film that were just kind of camped out there and kind of made, try to get the story, because, they weren't telling anybody. And it's amazing how small of a story it was at the time. Like I never knew about it until I've seen this movie. But like, to answer your question, I think a lot of it, like all the interviews are all, pretty, I mean, there's only so much you can do to film somebody talking about any given topic, but they interweave it in such a great way with the stock footage and the recreations of the, it's like this 35 millimeter kind of lensed recreations of these guys wearing these, gas pressurized suits, dealing with the rocket fuel maintenance. And
I think an untrained eye could have said like, wait, who is filming this?
Yeah.
Like it really was very like authentic. And I think you watch a lot of documentaries like this and you're used to this sort of like schlocky, like poorly acted reenactments. And there's always just something that's like a bit off about it. But this was incredibly engrossing and felt like a film within itself. But then also I thought it was weaved very effectively with the interviews so that they meshed well and you weren't like, you watch some sort of like investigation discovery and you're sort of torn between these two formats, this interview format and this reenactment format. And you sort of wish there was more of one than the other. This was a very coherent, like well-crafted whole. And I thought you made a great point that this is not a novice filmmaker who like doesn't have the budget to make a narrative film. This is someone at like the top of their game, really making a very well executed documentary. And it should have received more props. Like I was kind of blown away and like a little pissed that I had not heard about this, and so glad that you brought it to us.
Yeah, the technical. I mean, there's the film technically is great, but there's the content of the film, the interviews of these guys are so emotional in their telling of it. And you can tell, one guy said there's not a, in the 35 years that he dropped that socket head, he hasn't thought about it, because it ended up, I don't want to give too much away about the film because it's kind of nice to kind of learn the story as you're watching it. But like the people in the film have gone through this intense thing and they're sharing it and they're weeping as they're telling the story because the pressure, and they're trying to it's like this cathartic moment for them to kind of talk about this in an open forum. And everyone in the film has this kind of wisdom that just kind of comes through in their persona and in their interviews that not everyone has. Like these are like almost like evolved humans who've gone through a really traumatic thing, and they're trying to explain it in words. And there's this guy in the film, Jeff Kennedy, who's now dead, but they have some audio of him.
The audio is so great,
and just you could feel like his charisma and character and kind of heroic. I mean, he's like your cookie, like your stereotypical kind of hero figure.
Sergeant Rock.
Yeah, I mean, he's just
cut
like
from granite. That guy.
like bleeding red, white, and blue, but smart and intelligent and
really knows right from wrong.
Really just has this intense moral center, and just his telling and his like take, like he tries to like the bureaucracy of the scenario is just kind of overwhelming. He tries to cut through it, and a couple of different instances in his telling of it and
his actions.
But he, like the people in the film are just amazing, and.
You were contrasting the people who went through this experience to astronauts who have like looked at the Earth from the distance of the moon, and it does like psychologically change you. Which I just want to give a shout out to the movie For All Mankind, which is
I love it, For All Mankind.
It's a fantastic sort of stitching together of all the footage from the Gemini to the Apollo missions, but what. I'm interested, maybe we can wrap up with what you think these people have like learned and like what it is that they're seeing. Like my thought is that they're seeing that these situations, these cataclysmic, potentially world-changing events come down to a couple people like that guy Kennedy stepping up. There is in a very horrifying way, know them who are in charge. People don't, in a really helpful way, swoop in and like take control of this situation. It's a couple guys on the ground who, thank God, they were raised a certain way and had a certain kind of personality can make a bit of a difference. But there was no one. The system failed. There was no one on shift when this started going wrong who understood what would happen to the warhead when this went wrong. You had like Northrop Grumman or one of the equivalent Martin, who I think is the Martin and Lockheed Martin, got on the phone like late at night, but like no one knew if this nuclear weapon was going to blow up or not. Like no one had an understanding of this. No one's in control.
Yeah.
Well, I also like really captures the climate of fear of reprisals when they have the action, when they drop the thing, and they it's akin to a little kid where you did something wrong and you don't want to tell your parents what you did, so they're shuffling and stalling, and all of those minutes while these guys are not saying what happened. Those are crucial.
Horrifying. Yeah. It's like if he was he's like we've had an accident, we have a puncture of like the fuel tank, and we got this going on. No, but it was just the most human. Like I'm like that at my job. If something goes wrong, and my first thought was like, all right, how do I spin this? How do I make this someone else's fault, the system's fault? And it's like, I'm just in charge of stupid videos that go on the internet. Like these people are in charge of nuclear weapons, and they have the same like cover your ass mentality that I do.
It also makes me think about the opposite extreme of that. With the Trump mentality, where I fucked that up, so what, and just don't even address it at all. Just turn your back on it completely.
Yeah.
But what do you think people learned having been in this? Like, what are they bringing back? If you can, that seems like a big question to ask.
Well, it's something I've thought about. I mean, this isn't the first time I've delved into this subject before seeing this film. I actually worked on a documentary outside Las Vegas, and I got to go to the Nevada test site and see where some of these devices have been blown up and actually see the crater from a 10 kiloton warhead. And they're awesome. I mean, and the warhead in question in this film is so much bigger, though, than some of those tests they did in Nevada. It's just like exponentially bigger, these hydrogen bombs. They didn't blow those up in the continental United States. They did it out in sea and Siberia.
75 miles is the potential blast zone impact. 75 miles. And
that's the fireball. That's not the
the guys that were watching it were 200 miles away and they felt the blast from the test.
Yeah, no, I mean they're I think
and also they don't. I mean, I don't want to put a fine point on it, but all of this testing, there's fallout that we're all living with from each and every one of these tests. Yes. And these tests go on all the time. They're still happening.
Well, the one of the scariest things that I directly experienced was I went to this device. They call them devices when they're testing. They're not bombs; they're devices. And there was a device called Sudan that John F. Kennedy actually witnessed, and
Sudan.
Yes, it was that was the code name for it, and it was a earth moving. They were trying to see if they could use weapons for peaceful purposes to move Earth. And it's funny because it's the actual clip in the television series or the MTV's show Headbangers Ball. They would show this nuclear explosion with all this dirt kind of shooting up with these like tendrils of flame coming up, and they would intercut this into the open of the show. And JFK will witness this personally.
Really?
And it blew like a meteor crater, like it was, I think it was about 4,000 feet wide and 800 feet deep. And they wanted to see if they could blast like a new Panama Canal and kind of like do a lot of or blast out a basin of a bay so shipping, boats could turn easily. And they wanted to see if they could, but the downside to it was the radioactivity. And this went off in 1963. And I was there in 2002 when I was filming this, and I was getting shots of it. And I was with this woman from the national labs, and she was like, "Okay, you got to go. We got to leave here." And I was like, "Well, let me get one more shot." And when I was shooting, there was these three-star general came and like pointed at the hole and kind of nodded and grunted and said something to another guy, and they got a Jeep and drove away. And then I get in the car. And the woman's like, "You have to get in the car now." And so we drove away. And she's like, "You just absorbed enough radiation in the 20 minutes you were filming that. It was equivalent to laying on the beach for a week."
Wow.
In the sun. And that's how hot the radioactivity is from the 60s. So these things, 60s. When the radiation is poison, just lasts forever. And I think, getting back to your original question, what these guys learned from this whole experience is just the gravity and the true horror of these weapons, and they want to kind of communicate that through this film. They're just begging to get someone to listen to them because they went through this horrible experience and know how many things can go wrong and how complex it is. And my impression is everyone in the film has a deep, like everyone in the film is not, I don't feel like there's a bad guy in this film at all. There's no villain. There's no one walking away from this story going, I think we need more of these.
I don't know. I feel like the villain is the U.S. military because all of these guys got treated so shitty at the end of it all.
They were, but I think there's no individual. It's like the bureaucracy is the evil thing.
And that's another thing that the Schlosser talks about is how in the way that the military deals with all of these situations, though, is dependent on human error. That's always the excuse that they give for all of these things is, they play the blame game and they're just looking for somebody to pin the tail on the donkey, and then
CYA, man.
You're out of the game.
The game is made by humans, so it's inherently filled with error.
I have this thought talking about this right now. Is the nuclear age, is the advent of the atomic bomb, the official end of like the Industrial Revolution? You know, the Industrial Revolution being this battle using engineering and technology to fight this monster, which is Mother Nature, this thing that will destroy you. You know, you really look at these giant machines, these giant steamboats, these big levees. You look at these incredible works of 19th century, early 20th century engineering to fight back against a like brutal cold world. And when we finally won, it's when we developed the ability to destroy the world, to end it, basically. And now we're the enemy. Now we have to shift our focus from this weather patterns. We have to shift it from the idea that the oceans can harm us, that the environment we're living in is attacking us, to the fact that, like, okay, we have the most power of anything that's ever existed on this planet, and we're dealing with our emotional stability, our proclivity towards bullshit like nationalism. And, you know, we've won by becoming the bad guys. You know, like when we started trying to control things, like there's this naivete that people have with like making these factories that spew out all of these toxins. But it's like, well, no, this is letting people live better, you know? Now we're the bad guys. Now, like, what we're talking about is...
Well, there's a corollary, you know, thing that you're leaving out is oil production. And there's a corollary between population and oil production. And, you know, if you look at the graph, they go up together. And, you know, anytime you see that happen in a graph, you know what's going to happen next. And I think that's that's what you're talking about.
To be real bleak and weird, you know, the person who invented the concept of statistical correlation also coined the word eugenics. Yeah, it was Francis Galton. It was Charles Darwin's cousin, actually. So
my favorite Jacques Cousteau quote is when they asked him in 1950, "Monsieur Cousteau, you have spent more time on the ocean than you have on the land. What do you see as the greatest threat to humanity?" And he said it was overpopulation by far.
Yeah, that takes me back to Aldous Huxley, because that was what his main concern was, overpopulation.
Wait, are we going to murder a bunch of people with atomic bombs? Is that the conclusion here?
No, I think the real, you know, I've thought about overpopulation a lot, and I think the real problem isn't people. It's just the inherent problems of people, and the more people you have, the more problems you have, and the more mess you have. People are messy, and we're, you know, like thinking about the Industrial Revolution and where we're going and the end of the, you know, and these kind of dividing lines of technology and who we are and where we're going and nationality. I think these are all kind of problems of language and thought, human thought, and dividing ourselves from where we are. Mm-hmm. We're part of the earth, you know, and like you watch like For All Mankind in that film, you see the earth. It's not, you don't look at all the mountains and the people and you just see the earth, and we're part of the earth. We're part of the, you know, the philosopher Alan Watts said, you know, the earth peoples the way an apple tree apples. And we're part of the earth. And when we divide ourselves from it, we start thinking in these terms of us or them and this and that. And I think, you know, the weapons that we have are turned on ourselves always. And that's what this film speaks to, is like we have these things, we think we're going to point them externally, but they're always pointed internally. And even if we don't go to war, they can blow up and kill us. So, you know, it's something that I think just really resonated with me at this film, and just kind of tied a lot of different things together about big macro problems. And it's just an allegory for so many different things. And I just hope people, you know, listening to this, go watch the movie, read the book, and learn more and think about it more.
Thank you all for listening. This has been myself, Cole Smithy, my co-host Mike Lacey, and our very special guest this week, Mr. Anthony Matt. Thanks for listening. Check us out on SoundCloud.